If you guys want to know how to turn your Rival Charger into a 140 FPS beast that you no longer have to buy C batteries for, then you're going to want to check out this video. What is up, Nerf Nation? I'm Naptown Nerf, and today we are obviously doing a mod guide for the Nerf Rival Charger. And this thing is in desperate need of being modified, as it takes stock C batteries, is not compatible with any rechargeable Rival battery pack, and that just makes it very expensive to run, and it makes it not perform nearly as well. So we will be rewiring this entire thing for a Lipo, and luckily, since it does take 6 C batteries, there is plenty of room in here. We'll go ahead and crack that open. So there's plenty of room inside of there for a Lipo, even a really large Lipo. You can run this on 2S or 3S, so we will be doing that. But first, we're gonna have to turn it over and undo all the screws and get inside this thing. Alright, so there are our internals. Just to go over the screw lengths, they're all the same size except for this one, which is a very short screw right there in the tactical rail. And then there's 2 very long screws down at the bottom here in the foregrip area, I guess. Let's go ahead and check out these internals. So, looks pretty straightforward, reminds me a lot of the Zeus, which is what I expected. It's basically the same orientation and everything as the Zeus, except for where the batteries are located, and obviously we have an internal magazine instead of a magazine that's external and you can take in and out. That's cool. The magazine, I was a little worried that the spring might go flying, but it seems to be all kept neatly inside there, so that's a good thing. So it has some sort of piece right here that looks like a very large like in-strike attachment nub, but this must actually be the part that locks it in back here and keeps it in place when you're loading them in. So that's interesting. We will be removing all the wiring out of here and removing this board very carefully because we don't want to break off any of these tabs. So we will desolder all these points and snip some of the things that don't matter to get at our motor terminals. Let's just go ahead and start removing the stuff we don't need. All right, so there is a lock underneath this magazine for the jam door, and you have 2 options here. You can remove this magazine to pull that out, or you can just snip the wires off and leave it in there. It's not gonna hurt anything to leave it in there, and I don't know, it's hard for me to tell. I don't think that it has anything to do with the jam door locking, but I will go ahead and take this out just to show you how it's all done. All right, there's our magazine. We'll try to not mess up that spring. We'll just remove it and set it aside. Now we can get at this part and pull that out. There we go. All right, so yeah, that doesn't have anything to do with it locking. It actually opens that direction. I don't know what I was thinking about, but we'll go ahead and desolder these points and snip off everything else. I usually actually take my side cutters here and just snip off all these little guys just to get everything out of the way first. So then when we try to remove that board, it will come out as easily as possible. We don't want anything restricting it. We will go ahead and heat up our soldering iron so we can remove this board. All right, I like to take a little flathead and have it ready here. I'll do it on this side first. Once this gets to flowing, that's when you want to push up on it. And we'll try the other side. It's kind of a gradual process. Here we go. Do the same thing here. You just definitely don't want to force anything. Just keep working at it till it comes off. There is a little bit of glue on mine, but I don't think it's going to inhibit us any. I'll go ahead and try to get that out of there. This is still attached a little bit, so we're going to have to get that out. There we go. And we have our board free, so we do not need any of that. We can just throw that away. And we have a very clean place to connect our wires to now, so that's awesome. I think now I'm going to actually reassemble all the internals that were out so we can kind of see where we want to run our wires. Okay, so the only thing that I want to point out before I put this back together is this is the orientation of the follower for the magazine. You want that long stem going that direction, the short stem going that way, and on the back side. So that's how it should be oriented, and then we will go ahead and put it in here. Make sure your spring doesn't get messed up. Make sure it's inside here. There's a flat part here that it goes against. So we'll do that, and then we'll just set everything back into the screw ports that it goes down on. And then we can go ahead and put our trigger and rev trigger back in and our trigger lock. So we'll go ahead and put that back in too. If you removed this, I removed it, then I went and put it back on. You can go ahead and put that back on. There's a screw that goes in there, and there's a screw that goes underneath this here, right in there. Those are the two screws that you removed to get it off. And so we'll put those back in, and we should be pretty much good to go. All right, so before I screw this down, I want to let you know that make sure that the spring in here is in its correct location and not pinched off, and it should move up and down like that. So make sure that's happening, but it does kind of want to come out of its place, so I'm going to go ahead and put this on top. All right, so we look good there. We'll go ahead and put our rev trigger back, and that should move freely with no issues. So I would recommend keeping that in. I think it's a good lock to have in there, and it goes to your trigger lock, so then you can still use that if you want. You don't need the trigger lock, you can take it out, but this one won't be as obvious if you do take out than other ones, but I'll probably just leave it in there for now. But we will have to do some modifications in here to make a switch work. If you guys aren't aware, you don't want to have to replace the motors in a Rival Blaster. I think Out of Darts has some replacements, but they don't get any better performance than the stock ones, so there's no need to replace them. So we will be keeping those. That's why we did the work we did and removed the board safely. But we will go ahead and try to make some room for this guy in here, whichever one we decide to use. There's a lot of posts and whatnot in here that we will have to remove, and we don't want to go all the way down because it's got to sit up pretty high. So I'm probably going to have to remove this post right here, and along with this ridge and some of this in here, and probably some of that guy right there. And we'll start with that, and I'll let you know what it looks like at the end. Side cutters, here we come. Alright, so I think I'm pretty close. I might cut a little bit more away. This seems a little high back here, but it's really, really close. I also might cut off a little bit of the hook so it doesn't catch on anything, but I kind of like that, how it's pushing out there, so it's closer to the rev trigger than the straight one. I'd have to move more this way. This just gives me more room. I'm going to go with this switch, but I think either will work. You'll just have to modify, you know, accordingly. But yeah, that's looking pretty good. I'm going to remove a little bit more here, but yeah, it should be nice actually, because it should lock in there pretty well with all these different posts around here if you didn't remove too much. And then, you know, we'll put some epoxy putty in there, and that should lock in there really nicely and hold the switch in. We may have to remove some plastic from the other side of the grip, so keep that in mind when you put it back together. We will go ahead and remove a little bit of that and get this thing ready for epoxy. All right, you guys, so the switch is set into place there very nicely. And this looks to be in perfect placement. Now, when you're doing this, obviously before it sets, you really got to make sure you don't get any epoxy putty in the way of your lever here. So I always kind of smash it around and push it up against the switch, and then just make sure that there's nothing interfering with the switch. And then we will have to modify the other side slightly. I went ahead and did that. I just had to trim this off basically flush, for me anyways, and then it seems to fit on there very nicely. I won't put it on now, but it fits very nicely down there, so that's great. So before we actually start soldering wires in here, I want to modify the battery tray first to get this removed and all the stuff out of there so we have enough room for a lipo, and then we'll have to probably make our slot a little bit bigger possibly to get our wires through. That should be fairly simple. There is a screw here, so I might be able to just remove this. I'm going to see what this does. If I just remove this screw and see if I can get in there, and if it'll make it easier to remove stuff. It's actually one on each side. I'm not really sure what this does. I've never really seen this before. Oh, yeah, that might make it really easy to remove those. So we will go ahead and get our pliers and try to get those out. Wow, that was really, really easy. Oh, thanks, Hasbro. That was really nice. That was the easiest ever. Oh my goodness, that is awesome. So greatly appreciate that, Hasbro, for putting these little guys in there to make it easy to remove. That was very nice. So go ahead and screw these back down, and I'll probably just leave this one off and run the wires through here because there's a big hole there that's already there, so we don't need to even modify this at all or make a hole. So that's very clean. We will pull out these guys here. Let me go ahead and flip it over here first. Everything should be locked in theory, besides that. And then we will look. So we want our battery to sit back in here. You may have to trim out the middle here if you're going to use a really big battery. You may not have to if you're going to use a smaller battery. It kind of just depends on what kind of battery you're using, but I would recommend at least removing these tabs. Plus, they're kind of annoying sometimes when they slide around when you're running the blaster. So I'm going to remove those. Those should be just able to pull right out pretty easily. Just actually push out would probably be the best way to do it. There you go, twist and push. All right, so I'm planning on using the 1.8 Nanotech 3S Lipo. This is what I usually use, either this or even a slightly bigger one in my rival blasters. This will give it a good amount of life, but this is a very nice size. I even use this in Sub-Zero, my modified Strife, with a very big 3D printed battery door, but I'm probably going to make room for it right in here, and then these will run back here and through there, so we'll have the leads going that way. We will have to remove this middle portion here, and I may do it so it kind of holds in the battery a little bit. If you want to just remove the whole thing so you can get different size batteries in, then you may want to use some foam to keep it in place when running the blaster. And I may even still use foam because we don't want any plastic puncturing any wires or the battery. So yeah, I'll just do some modifications to the battery door to fit my Lipo now. All right, so have the battery tray all cleaned out there. It did take quite a bit of work. I would recommend using side cutters, and a Dremel is very, very helpful, but it's easier to get in there with side cutters, and then I cleaned it up with side cutters, but I did use a Dremel just to make it go quicker. You might be able to do it all with side cutters if you don't own a Dremel, but it's gonna take some time. Just make sure once you've cut it out with either of those two tools to go back in with some sandpaper and a file to really clean it up, make it all smooth. And one thing I kind of wish I would have done is maybe even gone with the Dremel on in this slot here to cut it out from the backside so it'd be easier to get to. I'm not sure, but that would be a recommendation. I did file it from the backside and it seemed to be easier to kind of get that groove there cleaned up. There will be a hole there, but it's still fine. It's still going to hold your battery fine. You could cover that up with something if you so choose, but not the cleanest tray removal, but definitely good enough for what we're doing here today. Just make sure you don't have any sharp parts that could cut into your battery. I'll probably smooth this down a little bit because that's pretty sharp right there, just to be safe. Yeah, we should be good to go now, and we can move on to the rewire. Now, if you've rewired any semi-automatic blaster before, it's going to be exactly the same, just like a Strife. You know, any semi-auto blaster, the wiring diagram is the exact same. So we will have our negative lead, whichever one that is, go straight back to the battery negative, and then we will have our positive go to the switch, and then from the switch back to the battery. So we will go ahead and figure out our polarity there and then start wiring this thing up. All right, so it looks like the negative is on the front and the positive will be on the back. I just use alligator clamps to a 9-volt. It's very simple to hook up to, and it gives you a good amount of voltage. But yeah, it's not turning a lot, but it's turning enough so I can see that it's going that direction. Yours should be the same in theory, but I always recommend testing because you never know. They could have been made in different, factories, so they could do things differently, but more than likely that's going to be the same as yours. All right, so we have our black and red 16 gauge silicon wire here. I would recommend 16 gauge for this blaster. I pretty much do everything in 16 gauge these days. It's the best size wire in my opinion to use for the Nerf application. And by the way, all parts you will need to do this mod will be in the description box, along with some tools that I would recommend if you don't have. So we will go ahead and run our wires through here, because that's where they're going to come through, just to give us an idea of how long they need to be, and we will kind of see where we want to run them. The negative is going to go straight up through here and into the motors, but that's about the length. It's always good to leave a little extra, and then we want a little extra obviously in the battery tray there, so we can go to our XT60 and have room to move around and whatnot. That looks to be pretty good right there. Go ahead and trim that off. And then we'll need a little black wire up here for our motors. And then this one is going to come from our battery and go down through here. And we're going to have to cut some channels out through here so they can run down to our switch. And then there will also be another wire coming from our switch going back to the motors. So we're going to need some room down in here for some wires to go, but that looks to be pretty good. We'll need another wire going from our switch back to our positive lead in the motors. So we'll get something going around here, move that out of the way. And it shouldn't need to be quite as long, but we'll give ourselves a little extra just in case. There we go. That should be good. And then we will want a short piece that goes from each motor terminal with a little bit of slack so it has some mobility there. So that looks to be pretty good. We'll need one red and one black. It doesn't really matter what color this is. It doesn't really matter what color anything is. It's just easier to tell which wires go where when they're different colors. All right, you guys, so the first thing I'm going to do is take the two wires here that were going into our battery tray and connect them to my XT60 connector. So to do this, it's highly recommended to have handy hands, and I would highly recommend in investing in a high quality set of handy hands that have a good solid base and longer arms like the one I have here. I will link that in the description box. The cheaper ones will work, and I think no matter what, you do need to have a set of handy hands to do good soldering, but the higher quality ones are just a little easier to work with and give you a little more room for mobility. And if you're going to do a lot of soldering, I would highly recommend it. So we will go ahead and strip these, tin them, and get ready to solder these two together. Alright, so the XT60 connector is complete there. This one has a fancy little cap on it, which I honestly don't like this version for most Nerf applications because it makes the XT60 connector even bigger. but for this blaster, it's fine that it's that size. But yeah, I'll link the version I usually use in the description box below, but this is a nice and clean option. So we will go ahead and put this back into our battery tray and run the leads out and start wiring up the blaster. We got those two soldered up my normal way. I've explained that in many videos before, but if you don't know how to do that and you couldn't tell from the video, I'd recommend going back and watching some of my other videos. But we're going to go ahead and use some liquid electrical tape, which is a nice thing to have on hand, although it is very messy, so be careful, just to insulate these points here on the motor terminals. And I have a little bit of wire that my heat shrink wouldn't cover right there that I may use it on. But it is something nice to have on hand if you do want to cover those. That being said, I don't know if it's super necessary. They are far enough apart, and they shouldn't interfere with each other at all. So I've never had an issue not insulating them, but since I have this on hand, I will. All right, we'll go ahead and thread that through there. There we go. So we should have, that should be good to go there. And now we can go ahead and try to cut out some slots here for our wires to run to our switch. Alright, so the battery terminal I usually take to the common here. So that looks to be pretty good. We'll cut it off there. And we'll trim that and solder it to the common here in a second. And then this one, we're going to run down here and run through our notches that we've cut out here. And this one looks to be almost the perfect length, which is awesome. And that one's going to go into our normally open. So we'll go ahead and solder those in, tuck our wires down, and then we should be good to go. Alright, one thing I like to do is zip tie these two wires together that goes to the battery, just so they have more strength and they don't get pulled or anything like that, and to kind of keep them together. Especially when we have a lot of room in the shell, but that just kind of gives it a little more strength. Keeps things nice and tidy in there, so if you have a small zip tie, I would recommend doing that. You could also put them on this to kind of keep these two together. I might do that also. Keep everything nice and locked down and in place. Same thing with these two wires over here, just so everything stays tidy. All right, we'll go ahead and put the rev trigger back in and all the other pieces you may have out of the internals and get ready to put our other half of the shell back on. Before I put the other half of the shell back on, I want to point out one thing that's very important. You want to make sure that these tabs are in front of the part right here, in front of the screw port here, because that's what pulls this back. So if you definitely need to have this all the way forward so it moves the spring back. And then make sure this one lines up with that and you should be okay. So you can test that. Once you get it all together and everything should sit down without forcing it. If you have to force something, definitely take it off and see what the problem is, what's keeping it from closing. But we can kind of hold that together and the whole part should move back and forth without any problem. If it's not doing that, you don't have something in the right spot. Now we can put the screws back in and we should be good to go. All right, you guys, we'll go ahead and put a few shots over the chronograph with the charger now that we got it running on a 3S Lipo. Should be getting really solid performance. We will also test it with a 2S Lipo and see which one works better and what kind of FPS numbers we get with each. I usually run Rival on 3S, but you can get quite a bit of hop-up craziness going on that way, so we will see how this does. Woo. That is curving to the right quite a bit. 133. 129. 142. 128. 130. 131. Yeah, we're getting quite a bit of curve to the right, so I may have to toy with that hop-up tab, but I'm going to try it on 2S first, because we're getting like 130s, 140s with this thing, which is actually a little too much power for Rival rounds. They just don't fly well at that FPS. So I'm going to go ahead and switch this out with the 2S Lipo, and we'll see what we got there. All right, so we went ahead and put a good-sized 2S Lipo in there, and hopefully that will, you know, make the FPS a little less, which I think is a good thing, which is kind of strange because usually we want things to perform, you know, with the most FPS possible, but that's not always a good thing with Rival. So we will see how this does, but I also think the hop-up mechanism may need to be adjusted slightly because it is kind of offset more to the left. Just this blaster is really strange with how everything's kind of on to the right side there. So we may have to toy with that also, but we'll see how this does first. Still curving quite a bit. 109, 123, 112. Oh, lost the battery door. 109, 116. So, depending on what kind of FPS you want, I mean, that's better for probably most HVZ style games. So you can use either, but this hop-up tab, because it's so far to the right side of where the barrel opening is, I think it's making it curve quite a bit to the right. So, well, I guess it's to the left side if you're looking at it this way. But you know what I mean. But we might have to play with that a little bit to see if we can get it a little more accurate. I may not be able to get that into this video, but I will be trying to modify it. And if I find something that works well, I'll put it up on my Facebook page. So make sure you check that out in the description box below. Thank you guys so much for watching this mod guide. Hopefully you found it helpful. I think the weighting of the blaster is so much better now. The cost of the blaster is going to be affordable to run now because you won't be putting $15 every time of C batteries into this thing, and it is just a far better blaster now. So please smash that like button if you enjoyed this mod guide. They take a lot of time to make, and I do it strictly for you guys and to help you guys out, as I remember when I was first starting in this hobby and looked for all the mod guides I could possibly get to figure out how to make these blasters better. So smash that like button, please subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and as always, peace out.